Hi, this is Karsten for Beer Brewing Experience.
Making beer is easy, or at least it's hard to mess it up. As long as you follow the recipe, you're going to get something which tastes at least similar to that what you were expecting. And the recipe today is a German-style, full-grain wheat beer, and we will make it in my small apartment.
German beer has traditionally just 4 ingredients: hop, malt, water, and yeast. But there is a 5th ingredient which you really need, and that's time. For the first day, you will need around 6 to 8 hours to finish the initial steps. The initial steps will be mashing, lautering, boiling, cooling, and cleaning. A lot of cleaning. Then we will start fermenting, which will take you another few days, and then we will do bottling and a conditioning. All in all, your first beer will be ready after 3 weeks. In this video, we will use the real grain. No syrup or malt extract. That makes it a bit more difficult. On the other hand, you will gain full control and you will have the real beer brewing experience. Okay, first of all, we will need 700 grams of wheat malt. But normally a wheat beer is not 100% wheat. Actually, what you will also need is barley. So we will add 500 grams of Pilsner Malt. That helps the beer to be less sticky during the process. Also, we will need 14 grams of Tettnanger hop pellets. And to start off the show, 5 grams of top cropping dry yeast. I'm using Fermentis SafBrew WB-06 for this beer, which provides a good, slim and fresh yeast taste.
Using dry yeast is actually not so common for wheat beer. Normally you would use liquid yeast because it's supposed to provide a more fruity flavor. However, I tried both and I cannot confirm this. On the other hand, liquid yeast is much less practical as it comes in bigger packages. It needs to be cooled, and dry yeast is also just cheaper. So for my beer, I use dry yeast because it's more practical and more economical.
Also, you will need water. As my beer brewing process is not so efficient, it's better to start with a bit more water and ingredients than having to less at the end. So I will start with 5 liters of water, and additionally, I will prepare 3.5 liters of sparging water. The equipment could be really challenging for you. It really depends what you have at home, but there are some things which are not so common in which you might need to buy before you can start. For mashing and cooking, you will need an 8-liter pot. Also, you will require a cooking thermometer, a fermenting vessel with a fermenting log, a measuring cup and scale, a sin strainer, disinfection powder, and at least 8 bottles of 0.5 liter for your beer at the end. Also, what is really helpful is a beer pump. You will see that later. It just makes things easier. Then there's the lauter. For this recipe, we're going to use a lauter, which is basically nothing else than a big bucket with a hole in the bottom and a spring which will let the wort through. As you might not have a lauter at home, you want to consider other options. For example, you could just use a big strainer or the brew in the bag method, which will speed up your brewing process quite a lot. However, I think the lauter gives you a much fuller taste and flavor, and therefore for this recipe we're going to use one. Beside the equipment which you really need, there is a bunch of stuff which you might want to have but is not really required. So let's start with the nice to have section. First, iodine solution. You can just stick with the mashing times I provide. However, making the iodine test will prove to you when the mashing is really finished. Also, I'm using a refractometer. Like the iodine solution, you can just stick to the boiling and fermenting times the recipe provides you. However, a refractometer or a beer spindle will make it much easier for you to really understand what's happening with your beer. And I will show you how to measure it correctly. Beside this, you might want to have some ice cubes for faster cooling, a funnel, a brewing paddle, a pipette, and some sugar and some way to dose it. For the fermentation process, you will need a dark room which can keep steady temperatures between 18 to 24 degrees Celsius. It's actually better to be on the lower end, so between 18 to 20 degrees, as the fermentation itself will produce heat. That's it. That's all for the preparation. Now we will start with the mashing process. Our target is to have at the end 4 liters of beer. However, experience have shown that there will be some waste. Therefore, it's better to prepare 5 liters of beer, so 1 liter more, than having too less at the end. Start with heating up 5.4 liters of water to exact 57 degrees. Then add the malt, using your brew paddle to mix it. That will cool down your temperature to at the end 55 degrees Celsius around. The next steps will take around 75 minutes in total by different temperatures. The first temperature, we call it protein rest, will be 10 minutes by exactly that 55 degrees Celsius. Afterwards, you're going to increase the temperature to 62 degrees Celsius and hold it for 45 minutes. It's called mash rest. The next rest is the Saccharification Rest. So you will increase your temperature now to 72 degrees and you will hold it around 20 minutes. I'm saying around because what we will do is we will wait until our mash is iodine neutral, which basically means that all starch has transformed into sugar. To test it, just put some of your mash on a little plate and drop some iodine on top of it. If it becomes black, then there is still some starch which can be transformed, while if it stays brownish iodine color, then you're done. The next step is called mash out, which means that you're going to increase your temperature to 78 degrees Celsius and we're ready for lautering. With lautering, we will filter our mash, leaving just the wort. Yes, this brown sticky liquid will be called wort. To start, add the mash into a lauter turn. As soon as the pot is empty, let's have a rest. Of course, not you should have a rest, but the mash should have a rest, so that it becomes a nice thick filter for our wort. This should take about 15 minutes. You, on the other hand, can use this time to clean and prepare. My setup you see on the screen. 50 minutes passed. Great. Now get a cup and open the valve slowly. Let the wort run into the cup. At the beginning, the spent grain on the bottom does not filter good enough, so our wort is a bit cloudy. Therefore, we capture about 1 to 2 liters and carefully put them back. While doing this, try not to move the grain too much. When the grain get a bit more clear, we're ready to go. Try to open the valve just enough for a small stream of liquid. Meanwhile, you can prepare the Sparge water. We will need about 78 degrees Celsius water as we work with sugar, and warm water means more liquid sugar, which leads to faster lautering. You can start adding the Sparge water when the wort is about 1 to 2 cm above the grain. Again, try to be careful and avoid moving the grain too much. Maybe use your brew paddle or spoon for a gentle flow. If you do not have a refractometer, just add about 3 liters of Sparge water. If you do, we can try to measure the amount of sugar of our wort in relation to the overall liquid, also known as weight percentage, or specific for wort, degree Plato. More sugar means more food for our yeast, but too much is also not good. Instead, we try to reach about 11 degree Plato. As shown, take some wort, put it on the refractometer and look through it. Unfortunately, a refractometer does not measure degree Plato, but the refraction of sugar called Brix. Luckily, there are many calculators in the internet which can convert it into any measurement you need, and for home brewing, this is good enough. Okay, the wort went through and we are ready for boiling. Before we start, we need to prepare the hops. The hops of 4 liters is so light that my kitchen scale had a hard time to measure it correctly. Instead, we will split the hop into 5 similar parts. Now we start cooking. Important, try to keep the lid of your pot open. This will help you to get unwanted tastes of your beer out. For the cooking part, we will use all the hops, so don't worry if there are still some left at the end.
Hops will balance the bitterness and sweetness of your beer and is a great ingredient for experiments. If you want to know more about how hops is affecting the taste of your beer, let me know in the comments and I might make another video about it.
So, the clock starts as soon as the wort boils. After 10 minutes, add 1/5 of your hops. 20 minutes later, provide another 1/5. Another 20 minutes later, add another 1/5 of your hops. Finish the cooking 10 minutes later after 60 minutes of cooking in total. Meanwhile, fill your sink with cold water and ice. As soon as the cooking is done, move the pot over to the sink and start cooling. First, we want to reach a temperature under 80 degrees. As soon as we have reached it, add the last 1/5 of the hops. Our next target temperature is lower 25 degrees. You maybe need to change the cooling water several times to reach it. This takes time, which is great because you can use it for preparing, fermenting, and to get everything clean and disinfected. We will move over from the hot part of the brewery to the cold part. Everything the wort touches now should be clean and disinfected. Fermenting basically means that you will grow microorganisms and you want to make sure that you will grow your yeast and nothing else. First, you need to prepare yeast. As we use dry yeast, you need to slowly rehydrate it. Boil some water to disinfect it, and then let the water cool down to 30 degrees. You will need up to 10 times more water than yeast. We will use 5 grams of yeast, makes 50 ml of water. Put the yeast carefully on top and let it sit for 15 minutes. Then carefully stir it and wait at least 5 more minutes. Meanwhile, your wort should be cooled to 25 degrees or lower. You can now move the wort from the pot to the fermenting vessel, while at the same time filtering out the hops. If you're like me, you probably don't know how much water has evaporated while boiling. Therefore, let's measure it once again. We try to reach 12.5 brix, which is about 12-degree Plato. If we are above that, just add more water. If you don't have anything to measure it, just add enough water so that you will end up with a bit more than 4 liters of wort. After you're done with it, add the yeast slowly and carefully. Finally, close the bottle with your fermenting lock. This is important to keep insects from crawling in and allow the CO2 to come out. Our brew day is done. Next, we need to store our beer in a dark place, which keeps the temperatures between 18 to 24 degrees Celsius. It's better to have the temperature on the lower end, as the yeast itself will produce some heat while it reproduces and eats the sugar. Next, waiting. At least 1 week, best are 10 days or more. During this time, the most exciting part happens, the fermenting process. If your fermentation works well, you will see the following things. 3 to 15 hours, you will be in a lag phase. Nothing really happens. But 1 to 4 days later, it's called the exponential growth phase. Now the yeast is ready to eat the sugar and produces CO2, and of course the alcohol. This phase is also called high kreuzen, and you will see some foam on top of your wort. 3 to 10 days is called the stationary phase. Your nice kreuzen will fall down and will be replaced by a kind of ugly dirty foam. Don't worry, that's how it's supposed to look. If you want to know how the fermentation is going, you can check it with a refractometer. Your beer should end up with around 4 to 6 brix. That's it. After around 10 days, you actually have already beer, young or green beer it's called, which will not taste good yet, because it's quite flat as it was fermented under room pressure.
So, how do we get our beer nice and bubbly? Well, with a second fermentation, also known as maturation. The task of the second fermentation is to reduce the taste of some byproducts. However, for us, more importantly, is that we are going to get our carbon dioxide in by resolving it under pressure. How do we get pressure? Well, by adding it into a closed container.
For example, a bottle. For bottling, you will need bottles. I use these nice flip-top bottles from the supermarket, which of course I need to empty first. Another option would be to use bottle caps. Make sure the bottles are disinfected. Using our cleaning powder is a good option to do this. Before we can add our green beer into a bottle, we will need to add some more sugar for our yeast to eat. Be careful, especially if you do not have a bottle manometer. If you add too less sugar, you will have too less CO2 in your bottles, but if you add too much, you will kind of create a bottle bomb. I will use white sugar for the supermarket, and to be on the safe side, you can add up to 4 grams for 0.5 liter bottles and 3 grams for 0.33 liter bottles. This of course only applies for our Weizenbier. Other beer might need a different amount. After you added the sugar into the bottles, you can use your cleaned beer pump. Try to put the tube completely to the bottom to minimize the voice touching too much air. The beer pump will work like a siphon, using gravity to move the beer. Try to keep some small room at the top of the bottle to give the CO2 some space. Afterwards, place them upright standing into an 18 to 24 degrees Celsius place and wait 2 more weeks. Make sure to cover them in case bottle explodes. Finally, put them for 2 days in the fridge to stop the fermentation. And you're done. You made beer and it's ready to drink. One last topic. How much alcohol does your beer actually have? Well, that's not easy to say. In the industry, you would distill a part of the beer. However, for a small portion, that's not really practical. So the only way is to measure the mass percentage of our wort before and after the fermentation. There's a formula which helps to calculate it, which I have put into the description.
So, this is how I make my own German full-grain wheat beer in my small apartment. Thanks for watching and enjoy your beer.